We're going to look at defining intercultural communication, why you should study intercultural communication. There's biases that affect intercultural communication. There's characteristics that distinguish one culture from another you should know about in intercultural communication. And there's strategies for improving intercultural and co-cultural communication. So let's look at defining intercultural communication. Intercultural communication refers to interactions between people from different cultural backgrounds. Three terms relating to understanding intercultural communication are culture, race, and ethnicity. Cultures can develop out of nation states over time, or even among a smaller group of people, such that the people share similarities that characterize them, that other people can identify that, such as this little girl, or, well, this looks like a guy, or these kids, teenagers, young adults. Culture involves language, religion, customs, and these often serve as unifying features of a distinct culture. Again, we look at her and we assume most likely, and I use the word assume because we're not sure, we don't have credits, but that she's probably Native American. But she could also be from other cultures around the world that share similar clothing. Now, a culture is a unique combination of traditions and customs that is transmitted through learning and that shape the belief and behavior of the people who live within that culture. So in her culture, let's just say she is a North American Indian. Now there were, I don't know the exact number, but we'll say hundreds, if not thousands of nation states of Indians prior to the Europeans landing here. Each of those cultures, of those nation states, spoke a specific language. Don't know about their religions, but they might have followed different spirits. And their customs might have been very different depending on where they lived, whether it was in the mountains and forests, grasslands, wetlands, rivers, oceans were nearby. What are some of the cultures you are part of that define who you are? You can think about that. You may know what culture you're from, but how do you really think about it? And how do you treat others from their culture? When we talk about race is using scientific evidence for racial distinctions. But it's very weak, and the concept of race is vague. For example, should Hispanic be a race? That one's kind of tricky, but you got to think about it. So race generally refers to biological characteristics or categories of a people distinguished by inherited features. Okay, so skin color, quality of hair, facial features. There's some other things in there, but anything biological versus scientific definitely will help people know what the races are. One of the things that our government uses is census, and this has changed many, many times over the years. When I was younger, there were 3 races in the United States. Now there are many. The one that upsets me the most is the one that says other, because other means your grandparents, maybe, let's say if you have 4 grandparents, they could be each from a different race. So how does that fit into here? This is one of those things that probably needs to go away because it's just very discriminating, I think, against race. Ethnicity is the concept of cultural features. It's an ethnic group that consists of people who share common cultural elements as well as a common history. So you have Irish, Polish, Greek, Jewish, pick any country, any area on the planet, and that is the ethnicity. Think about this. Within the category of Asian, there are multiple diverse cultures and ethnicities, including Japanese, Chinese, Vietnamese, Thai, and Korean. It's just a way of describing a group of people. It's an ethnic group. Think about Cleveland or other areas where you may live. There's, even if we go up into Burton, from Twinsburg, there's different ethnic groups within our local area. When we talk about co-culture, this is a group outside of the dominant culture, which is often subjected to unequal treatment. In other words, they're not treated fairly. And we all know about this, right? We've heard this in the news. We see this sometimes for real in our lives. In all societies, there always is a dominant culture. And there's usually several non-dominant co-culture groups within that entire culture. So the dominant culture is the group that has the most power, influence, and rights. Let me repeat that and listen carefully. The dominant culture has the most power, influence, and rights. Not the most people, but power, influence, and rights. Now, if we were actually sitting in our classroom and I'm standing in front of the class and the entire class of all 7 people were sitting out there, who is the dominant culture and who is the culture within our class? Well, it depends on your perception. Now, you're sitting facing the front, you're looking at a teacher. Technically, the teacher is probably the dominant culture because I have all the power and influence and rights to mandate things over you, the student. But then you can also look around and say, well, that's not really the culture, but maybe it's male, female, or maybe hair color, or maybe age. Again, it just depends how we view it. But within a government, this generally shows up. And you can think of many countries around the world where the dominant culture is the very small minority of a certain type of people versus the overall culture. In the United States, the dominant culture is composed of white, educated males who are employed, usually managerial, professional occupations. And again, this is from the publisher and author back in 2013, 2014. They make up the dominant culture. The dominant group tends to make the rules that work to the dominant culture's advantage. Whether it's in academics, in business, in government, even in the family. And of course, that can flip-flop. Again, this is not saying this is the way it has to be. It's just the way it was when they did the writings on this. And things do change over time, and people always try to change things because that's what people do. We change things. A co-culture in the United States, and it says, according to the author, women are in an unusual co-cultural group in the U.S. because although they outnumber men, they have not been equal to men in terms of power, influence, and earning ability. So it's not about the numbers, it's about the power, the influence, and the rights. Now, when we break down the co-cultures, even within the U.S. further, we have women, ethnic minorities, gay and lesbian individuals, immigrants and refugees, the physically or mentally challenged, and even political groups. Take any one of these, and you could break these down even further of co-cultures within the co-culture. And then, of course, there'll be a dominant culture within the co-culture. I mean, it's as far as you want to go on this stuff. It depends what you're really studying and trying to show, prove, or just even understand. Communication between members of the dominant culture and co-cultural groups can help to increase perspective taking and mutual understanding around the world. I love this image of the hands, and they look like children of many different colors holding up the world. But notice what country is showing up. Now again, depending where you're from, this could be insulting, or this could be, well, the United States tends to think we dominate. And in just a little bit, we're going to look at a word called ethnocentrism. Now, I don't want to judge anything on this, but this is probably one of those things that's called bias. But again, the world's round. Which side can you show? Maybe just show the Pacific. But then again, that would show the Pacific Islanders as being important compared to everybody else. Why study intercultural communication? Many reasons. The increasing prevalent idea that you're going to be working probably for a business that's probably got some overseas or transnational business goings on is probably going to happen. I work at Kent State University, and you may work for a university someday. We are very transnational. Not only are our students from everywhere else around the world, so are our teachers and administrators. And we have many, many links to countries all around the world. So anybody I talk to on main campus, they could be from somewhere else. I met a lady literally just got off the plane from Uzbekistan. And she hadn't even unpacked, still had her suitcases with her, and they introduced her to the group of people we were with. That's pretty cool stuff. I mean, that's, hey, welcome to America, you know, and she's still teaching today. It was about 4 years ago. International conflicts. You got to know this stuff. There's always something going on. Any country out there that we declare as an adversary or they declare us as an adversary, we need to comprehend what they're really saying, because it's not always the words, it's the actions that make up intercultural communication. And we need to understand the coding and the decoding of those things. Now, if anybody's ever been in the Peace Corps, you know anybody in the Peace Corps, that's a humanitarian service. Same thing with military. Military people who get sent overseas, they could be Germany, Korea, Australia, England, anywhere. There's different intercultural communication aspects. During the Gulf War, women were allowed to go overseas with the U.S. They weren't in frontline duties, but they were not allowed off the Air Force bases because the countries forbid it. Because they were in the military and women weren't allowed to be in the military back then. So a lot of things change, and we have to understand that. Everything can't just be our way or your way. It's whatever the dominant culture says is the way. Studying intercultural communication will increase the ability to communicate more effectively with other people from everywhere around the world. When you look at this picture, what country is that? What does this gentleman represent? What is he reading? Is this anywhere in North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, Southeast Asia, Middle East? Well, it's kind of hard to tell. Now, if you're into archaeology and you really understand things, you might know where this is from. But you got to look deep into the archaeology. Again, this is part of communication, decoding the code, whether it's verbal or nonverbal. You may work for that global business, and again, you may think my company doesn't work internationally, but chances are they do. They might have one or two customers overseas, or how about Canada or Mexico? That's international, and that makes it a global business. If you've ever been to Canada, Mexico, the Caribbean, you know that it is just slightly different than ours. Canada especially, there's a lot of English speakers. Till you get to Quebec, then there's fewer English speakers. The signs actually go from English to English French to French as you drive from Northeast Ohio up into Quebec. So again, even on a business trip, you're going to have to know different cultures on this. Biases that affect intercultural communication. Biases involve ethnocentrism, stereotyping, and prejudices. So in contrast to ethnocentrism, cultural relativism involves viewing other cultures as objectively as possible without judgment. In other words, from a child's eyes. When children see people, they might go, oh, they're a little different, but they see everybody as equals. They haven't learned bad things about other people through comments that adults say because, well, adults shouldn't say things around that to children because children pick up on these things. But ethnocentrism is the belief that your own group or culture is superior to all other groups or cultures. So when we apply this to being American in America, we do this a lot. Well, it's not good or bad. It's just the way it is. How about in high school or middle school? When you cheer for your team against the other, is that being ethnocentrist? Interesting. So we learned this very early, that we should always cheer for our team and not necessarily boo for the other team, but not wish them as good thoughts as ours. Problems arise when we judge other cultures as inferior. In other words, we look down on them rather than simply different. When we start saying, well, they're not from here, they're different, they're nothing. Well, that can be a problem. When some people hear accents from another person, they think, oh, their English isn't good enough, so they must not be as smart as me or as good as us. That's being ethnocentric. Now, ethnocentrism and cultural relativism are two ends of the spectrum. They are opposites. The ideal for intercultural communication lies somewhere in between that. When you take sides, there can be nothing but a fight. Stereotyping is generally thought of as a negative thing. And stereotyping is also the tendency to generalize to all people in a group from the characteristics, behaviors from just a few people. If you've only met, say, one person from one type of culture and you had a really bad impression of that person, maybe because they weren't on their best day, something was wrong with them, they were sick, and you think, oh, they all must be like that. Okay? You see this, and I'm going to throw the stereotype at her because we've all heard it. Asians are smarter than everybody else. Well, that's a stereotype. But again, because that's been perpetuated. Whether they are or aren't is irrelevant. Maybe it's how hard they study because of their cultural demands that they do good. Or how about this guy? All these kind of people are very fast. Okay, maybe true. Well, maybe he's trained harder. Maybe genetically this guy is gifted. Maybe his sister is faster than him. Maybe the 8-year-old standing next to him in this lane is even faster than both of them. So again, stereotyping is generally a negative thing. The result of stereotyping is that all members of a group are viewed in a limited way. In other words, very specific. I see you, I stereotype you, right? You see a school teacher. Oh, they all must be like that. They all hate students. They all want to fail me. Yeah, that's a stereotype. So think about this. Have you ever been stereotyped that you know of? Not a good thing. What stereotypes of other people exist? Now, you can think of your own ideas, and obviously you can't share them back right now, but have they been good or bad? I stereotype people, but not negatively, but just to help me get an idea of who I'm speaking with so I can be much more respectful than just treating them as they look. Some people dress in certain ways, and they want to act in certain ways. And if they get treated differently than the way they expect people to, it's shocking. So whenever you see somebody, say a goth person, okay, dressed in the black and the dog collars and the thick makeup and 22 different facial piercings and tattoos coming up through the ears and full arm sleeves and leg sleeves, you think, okay, that person's strange. Well, they're different. But if we stereotype that into a negative thing, that's not always a good thing. So think about what goes on in your head next time you see somebody who is different than your group. Now, if stereotyping gets too out of hand and we fall into the prejudice world, this is generally a bad thing. So often the people on the receiving end of prejudice belongs to marginalized minority groups. In other words, a cult culture, a small cult culture. Prejudice is often based on ignorance, meaning that the person expressing the prejudice simply doesn't know much about the target of the prejudice. Because you see something, and we see this guy, okay, good or bad. Well, if you say bad, are you being prejudiced? No, he was a bad guy, but he created prejudices. How about these people? They're not out there for Sunday afternoon picnic. Well, they may be, but what do they represent? They represent prejudice because we know these to be hate groups. How about over here? These people are not hateful, right? Well, he wasn't hateful. I don't think she's hateful. At least I think it's a she. Hard to tell, but we see certain coding if we interpret that. They're usually treated pretty bad. And again, could be by these people. So the answer to prejudice is education, respect, and dialogue. It can help reduce prejudice. That's the biggest thing. If you don't know a certain group of people, find out about them. Are they good, bad, evil, or whatnot? But you got to remember this. Throughout history, people have done some very hateful things because of their prejudices. Scapegoating. Stereotyping leads to scapegoating, which can lead to prejudice. Prejudice is generally a negative attitude toward a group of people just because they belong to that group or are even associated with that group. Think about cliques in school, right? Think of the movies or the Mean Girls movie where there's the couple girls in the group and the other girl wants to be part of it and they teased everybody. And all of a sudden the new girl got in and she realized this isn't right? So these things are very human and we need to be careful of those things. So let's look at characteristics that distinguish one culture from another. Individualistic cultures versus collectivist cultures. Individualistic cultures value freedom, choice, uniqueness, and independence. So place the I before the we, because that's who we are. Well, that kind of doesn't make sense, right? Well, I'm independent, so I must be an individualistic. I value competition over cooperation. Okay, that makes me an individualistic. I'm not saying me personally, but I value both. How about owning private property over state owners of property? In America, we love to own our own things. If you go to another country, say China, private property is not such a normal thing. It's more about state property because it's a different culture. Individual achievement over group accomplishments. Here, it's all about me. And you could say that for yourself. It's all about me. You don't say, I'm going to college so society can be a better place. Generally, it's I'm going to college so I can be a better person and help society be a better place. Individual opinions matter over group opinions. Now, when we're working in groups, that could change, but guess what? You're an individual who goes into that group with certain opinions and ideas, and that makes us part of that individualistic culture. Now, in a collectivist culture, they value the group over the individual. They place the we before the I. They value commitment to family, tribe, and clan. Now notice that It's not something we use here. We use family, but tribe and clan, we generally don't use that in North America. That's not something that we use. Now, Native American Indians, yes, but everybody else, probably not. Collectivistic cultures are usually loyal to their spouse, employer, community, and country. Not to say that individualistics aren't, but it's just at a different level. They value cooperation over competition, and especially group-defined social networks and duties over personal opinions matter more to them. Now, if you fall somewhere in between or go back and forth on these, that's great. That means you're understanding that it's not just one person against the world, but it feels that way sometimes. So when you're working in a group, yeah, it's you, but you're with a group, and yeah, it may be competitive, but you got to cooperate on certain things. You may have rideshare. Most people don't do rideshare, but the ones that do. Who owns the car? Maybe everybody does. Usually it's one person owns a car, but everybody shares in the gas and the maintenance so they can get to where they got to go. How about individual achievement over those group accomplishments? Again, working in groups, it's you and the group against an assignment or maybe another group. And your opinion matters, but maybe you negotiate with a group to make it work so the group has an opinion and you just took a part of it. Uncertainty accepting versus uncertainty rejecting cultures. All right, so think about examples of each one of these as we go through it. So uncertainty rejecting cultures have difficulty with ambiguity and diversity. Okay, most are not democracies like ours. They are most likely to have many rules regarding behavior, and they are more likely to reject outsiders of their culture, such as immigrants, refugees, and migrants, especially if they look different from and act different from the majority of the population. Now, you can say, well, America's doing that now. Well, possibly, but we have rules, right? But we are a democracy, so we're not quite there. Uncertainty accepting cultures tend to be tolerant of ambiguity and diversity, and they're more often democracies than dictatorships. Oop, there's that big word, dictatorship, or countries led by powerful royalties. Think of a country who has kings and queens that are ruled by them. Now, England has a queen, but she doesn't rule. She has a lot of power, but not really. So think of it, there's probably some small European countries, some African countries that still run by kings and queens. Dictatorships, they're on all ends of the world. Which do you feel works best for you? Or maybe it's a little bit of both. Implicit rule cultures and explicit rule cultures. Implicit is one in which cultural rules are embedded in tradition and followed faithfully. In other words, nobody questions it. It's handed down from parents to kids, to parents to kids, to parents to kids. And it's followed faithfully. It doesn't change. And there's that commitment. Individuals in these cultures are unlikely to question societal rules. And it could be because of that's just the way they're trained and they don't want to change. Or it could be the rules of society are so strict that if they do, something bad can happen. Okay, so that's implicit. Explicit rule cultures is one where policies, procedures, and expectations are more likely to be discussed and negotiated. All right, think about this. When you were a little kid and you wanted to stay out later or play longer in your Xbox or PS2 or watching TV or doing something that your parents didn't want you to do, there was usually a negotiation. It might have been quick and swift where the parent won anyhow, or there was true negotiation where you got a little bit and they got their wishes. In other words, you cleaned your room after watching an extra 5 minutes of TV or playing on the Xbox, something. Do you tend to question rules or follow them without much thought? And I'll add, in what situation and what role are you taking in that culture? P-time cultures and M-time cultures. P-time cultures refer to cultures which have a polychronic time schedule. In other words, these people view time as relationships. Okay, it's contextual based. In other words, they're not going to stop talking because it's 6 o'clock and it's time to go home and have dinner. They're not just going to run away from friends from coffee at 2 in the afternoon because they have to get back to work. Well, unless the boss says they have to. But generally, it's when we're done, we're done. Think about going on vacation. You're part of a P-time culture unless you're on a very strict schedule on vacation. But if you're just going to chill out on an island somewhere, and you just, when I'm hungry, I'll go eat. That's a P-time culture. In an M-time culture, this refers to cultures which have a monochronic time schedule. In other words, things are compartmentalized to meet personal needs. Okay, so I need to sleep between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. every single day. And I have to be at work by 8 a.m. and I have to have lunch between 11 and 12. And I have to have a coffee break from 2 to 2:10. And I have to leave work at 5 o'clock. That's M-time culture. It's very structured, very scheduled. Then, on the weekends, I get to go have a good time. I get to hang out with my friends, starting Friday at 8 p.m., because before that, I'm going to finish my homework, so I don't have to do it on the weekend. And then Saturday morning, I'm going to go to the workout. I'm going to go play tennis, go play golf, go do what I want to do. And then Saturday afternoon, I'm going to sleep for 6 hours. I'm going to wake up and go do it all over again with my friends. Well, those are societal activities. So, do you know people who would be lost without their planner? Now, they use planners, I'm going to say their iPhone or their notepad, or people who don't like being rushed. And do you go back and forth yourself? Do you change in the summer versus fall, winter, and spring? Depends on what you do. If you like to ski on snow versus water, things change. Strategies for improving intercultural and cultural communication. Some things to work on. Avoid stereotypes. Again, you can use it as you're walking up to somebody momentarily, just to say, oh, that person's older than me. I should use the word sir or ma'am. Or even in the military, you could see ranking, or police officers, you see a uniform. Well, when you stereotype a cop and say, that's a cop, that's not really stereotyping. That's identifying them with a uniform. But if you're stereotyping, oh, that's a cop, he must be bad, or she must be a horrible person because she's a cop and she arrests people. Well, that's stereotyping, so avoid that. Conduct a self-assessment. How do you see other people? Now, you may not consciously be aware of this, but when you see certain people, do you tend to run across the street away from them? Do you tend to reach in your coat like you got a weapon in there? Do you tend to hold your purse if you're a girl? Guys, do we tend to maybe make sure our wallets are there after passing by somebody in maybe a little bit of a crowded area? Conduct a self-assessment of how you're viewing other people and why you do that. Practice supportive communication behaviors. In other words, meet people from other cultures and talk to them. Go up and say, hi, my name is. Don't say, hi, I'm from America. Where are you from? It's kind of silly, but I've heard people do this. Somebody in your class eventually will be from somewhere else, especially if you go down to Kent, Maine. You will meet people from somewhere else. You'll be able to see it. You'll be able to hear it. Their behaviors, they might be off in a corner by themselves with their head down. Then, of course, people always have their eyes glued to their phone. But some people just sit there very quietly, just kind of staring down at a book. Interesting. Go up and introduce yourself. Try something different. Develop the sensitivity towards diversity on that. And it's not just about other races, it's about other types of people. Sometimes we know we're going to be uncomfortable in certain situations. I would ask you, try to expand yourself. And what it does develop sensitivity. Then you can make your judgment and critiques after that. But you got to try it. It's one of those fun things to do. But don't do it as a joke. Do it as a true personal experience. Avoid ethnocentrism. Saying, yeah, we're the best, nobody's better. Yeah, well, you know what? Sometimes people beat us. It's called the Olympics. America has a tendency to get very upset when other people beat us, or at least they did. Now we kind of expect that. But to me, the Olympics is a clear-cut case of where ethnocentrism stands out very, very poorly for all countries too, because it's a very, very unique place where the whole world does come together for something that should be neutral, and it's usually taken advantage of. Develop code sensitivity. In other words, if you see people that are not like you or doing something different, what is the code that they're sending? And again, if you can't read the code, be careful how you respond back or how you think about them. Code sensitivity is really important in life, and you have to practice it. Use and encourage, not discourage, descriptive feedback. So when you're talking to somebody from another culture, and let's say it's somebody from China, because you'll meet people from China down at Kent State quite often. You don't want to go, hey, yeah, so you're from a different culture, right? Yes. Cool. That's not encouraging. Say, wow, I've never met anybody from China. What was it like there? Where are you from? Can you show me on Google Map where you're from? I really want to know more about that. It can be really interesting. Be reflexive to their response. If they say, oh, well, I'm from, this part, and you go, oh, yeah, is that like by California? Be careful on that one. Open up your phone. Ask, where is this on the map? Manage conflicts that arise over beliefs and practices. If somebody has a different belief or practice than you, don't go up and say bad things to them. First of all, you do that, you're probably going to be on a camera and you're going to go viral and it's going to go very bad for you. When we talk about managing conflicts that arise over belief and practices, that's not just you, it could be other people. When you hear somebody say, oh, those people, blah, 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 maybe ask those people, so actually, what do you know about those people over there that you're dissing? Oh, yeah, well, nothing. Okay, well, that's prejudice, okay? So, in a way, you can break that up without really antagonizing somebody. Very interesting. Make time to open those communication channels. Bottom line, I think this is the most important one. This is with anybody. Guys, gals, different cultures, different languages, sex, races, whatever you want to throw in here. Make the time to talk to people. Very, very important. All right, that is it for Chapter 6 on intercultural communication. Go out, have fun meeting new people. Now, I'm not saying just go up to strangers. It's usually best to do it in a classroom and then work your way out from there. If you're on a job with somebody from another culture, say hi, get to know them. Because you know what? They're probably just as afraid as you are to meet somebody else.